Brian, good morning to you.
Morning, lads. How are you?
Good. I mean, this is a kind of a busy period coming up. There's no rest usually for players at this time of year. There will be a certain amount of rotation, which we talk about almost year on year now with the Guinness Pro 14. But how did you find it, Brian, these kind of festive periods when you were playing? Because given the way that things are packed in with the Champions Cup, there's not a huge amount of rest for the players coming up over the next couple of weeks.
No, there's not. But, you will be given a quota of time that you're allowed over the be it the 3 games usually in the lead up to the next round of Champions Cup. That dictate comes from IRFU and from the national coach. So the provincial coaches have to pick and choose where best to use those players. Usually there's a focus on one game where they load a lot of their international players and then they try and give them another break. See, the difference between the internationals is once we get into January, there'll be no break, whereas provincial players, you get to that week before Six Nations and they'll be given a week away. So it's just about managing minutes on feet. The rotation in the provinces now is changed from my time as well. You look at the strength of the squads and the quality of players being able to come in and do just as good a job. Particularly when you look at what Leinster have done over the last couple of seasons, now Munster coming to the fore on that as well. So you realise that you're the entertainment around Christmas. You're be it on Stephen's Day or on New Year's Day or a day after. The reality is you've never really, if you come in straight after school, you've never really missed it because you've never had it in the first place. So it's just part and parcel of being a pro, and don't have a glass of wine with your Christmas dinner, but fill your boots still.
Yeah, Thomond Park this coming Saturday for Munster against Leinster in the Guinness Pro 14. Brian, Munster coming back at the weekend against Clermont-Auvergne in France, 19 points down at the stage. They win by 39 points to 31. Alan Quinlan was saying on the programme yesterday morning, he thinks it's right up there with the miracle match, maybe even Munster's best ever performance in Europe, possibly the best ever Irish performance on French soil. For you, where does it rank, Brian?
Yeah, it definitely ranks right up there. I think it's amazing because we've expected it of other teams in the past, and maybe that expectation isn't quite there of this Munster team yet. And so when you get pleasantly surprised by that the jersey hasn't gone away and the individuals in it maybe not quite of the same caliber of previous successful periods, but the bottle and the heart is still there. And in most cases, I don't know very many teams that, conceding a bonus point after 25 minutes wouldn't have felt, well, this is damage limitation. Whereas, they just stayed in the fight. They just thought about trying to win the next play and slowly, progressively got into the game. And it was an amazing, I actually unfortunately, I went to the airport just after half time, so I was kind of following it online, and so I didn't get to fully appreciate the manner in which the screw turned. And I suppose the only shame really is that there wasn't a packed crowd in there to experience it as well, for them to silence them as well. And it was a phenomenal performance from lots of individuals, but even the way they turned their scrum around, Josh Wycherley in the first half, getting his wings, and I think we've all seen those pictures of how high he was in that scrum down close to the Claremont line, and then for them to turn around and get the ascendancy in the scrum is amazing mental flip and attitude from those front rowers and from the pack to scrum as 8, but also huge kudos to Graham Rowntree, who solved those problems at half time. So definitely one for the ages. I guess you've got to look when you compare to other successful European victories for Munster, for other Irish provinces. What's at stake? Yes, it's still a pool match. So I think you look at Toulouse away with Munster. You look at some of the other ones, maybe Claremont away for Leinster in the semi-final. When you get to knockout stages and there's a final to be played for, I think that maybe just ups the stakes. So it's right in the conversation of the best ones.
JJ Hanrahan as well, Brian. This has to be a huge boost from 24 points in the night, 100% from the kicking tee. The question marks have always been there about his clutch kicking. When Munster really needed him to score in big games, you've got Healy emerging as potential competition for the 10 shirt. I'd imagine this is a huge boost for Hanrahan, that performance at the weekend.
Yeah, because we know what JJ's capable of with ball in hand. He's always been that type of player, and maybe not out of the mold of Raj, or what, coming in as a successor, what was previously there. So he's always had that attacking game, and the issues have always arisen around his ability to be able to keep that scoreboard ticking over and clutch kicks. And we saw it in the second part of last year when the game reemerged in August. He struggled in the semi-final against Leinster, and a couple of clutch kicks that just could have kept Munster in the game, and he missed them. And I suppose it's a bit of a thankless job. It's expected of you to knock those kicks over, and when you miss them, you're the bad guy in the team, and you're the one that gets the stick from people, because you've just got to, if you're going to go and take on goal kicking, you've got to have an ability to keep the team in the game. But no, huge credit to him on this occasion. He was knocking them over from everywhere. He was obviously in a real groove too. You could tell that, it wasn't like that, he was just creeping them over. The one that hit the crossbar was a magnificent kick from 45 out. That is a huge confidence builder. And to go 9 from 9 and then play the way he did and run the back line the way he did, and navigate the team into the right parts of the field, it was an excellent performance from him. And if he can keep that up, he'll get his name back into international reckoning, where maybe he once was.
We'll chat about your old team, Leinster, in a bit more detail in a moment, but Leinster go to Munster this weekend. And I wonder, Brian, is the importance maybe a little bit more for Munster coming into this? Both teams unbeaten in their first 9 games this season. Munster have got a chance maybe to banish a few recent defeats against Leinster. Another semi-final defeat is still very fresh in the memory in the Pro 14 semis just a couple of months ago. How much of a boost would it be for Munster to beat, even if it is a slightly depleted Leinster team on Saturday?
Yeah, I think that with the rivalries, anytime you beat one another, it's a shot in the arm of confidence, because they're good sides, and particularly away from home. And from a Leinster perspective, it's down in Thomond Park. Am I right?
It is, yeah.
So I think, am I right in saying Leinster are the last team to beat Munster down in Thomond? So they've got a proud record down there. They hate losing in Limerick, and yeah, this is a great opportunity to build on what they feel is the direction that they're going in. And for the first time in a few years, there's been consistency to their performance. There's been consistency to seeing how their shape has evolved in attack in particular, how they're using their big ball carriers as dummy runners as well as ball players. I think CJ Stander and Peter O'Mahony to great effect at the weekend, behind CJ a couple of times, having defenders bite in, and then Peter using the subtlety for that Mike Haley try. Those sort of things are new aspects that we haven't seen in their game previously. So I think it's really exciting to see that evolution finally come to fruition. And they'll want to keep that momentum and keep that winning run going. And no better game to do it than against the Pro 14 champions, and a team that they've struggled against in recent years. So, of course, the rivalry remains as strong as ever, irrespective of whether they're full teams or not, and you do not want to lose at home.
Brian, just to discuss that for a second, the current state of the Irish provinces, when you see that great win for Munster at the weekend, Leinster winning handily without really hitting fifth gear, Ulster and Connacht, improved performances from them as well, albeit disappointing losses in the end. But should we all be pretty optimistic about the current state of the Irish provinces? I know it goes up and down and comes in waves, but where each of the 4 teams are at the moment, should we be fairly optimistic?
Yeah, I think in particular where Connacht and Ulster are, and this, I certainly don't want to sound patronising, but in reality, the order has been more recently has been, Leinster, Munster, Ulster, and Connacht. But when you look at the consistency again of the performances, even in defeat, of Ulster over the last 2 weekends, the way they played in Kingsholm, but the way they fought back it's not always about the style, but it's about the mentality of being out of the game, but then finding a way to get yourself back in it. And albeit they lost in that last play of the game and they'll be devastated at the end result, I think it's the attitude shift that an ability to stay in the fight longer is the improvements that I've seen in Ulster. And likewise, Connacht, how many teams over in Racing have scared the home team in La Défense Arena, with those last couple of plays of the game where they ultimately could have lost it, where I think they were 18 points behind. Racing didn't score in the second half, or didn't score for 35 minutes. That's a pretty impressive a game plan to bring to somewhere like Paris and have the ability to put it into full effect against one of the most attritional teams. So they're thinking their way around problems being thrown at them. And I think, credit to Dan McFarland and Andy Friend. I think they've got their teams playing to the strengths of the individuals, and they're not the most powerful teams. So they've got to think their way around manipulating defenses and playing a really clever kicking game. And I think in Jack Carty and Billy Burns, they've got two good operators in that regard. So huge kudos to those two, and hopefully Munster and Leinster, even though Leinster had a slight dip in form maybe by their standards at the weekend, can continue driving the standards, and it can feed positively into the international team.
Can I just ask you briefly about the incident, I guess, at the RDS, which caught most of the headlines on the weekend? Tom Wood's tackle on Josh van der Flier with 10 minutes to play. I mean, Keith Wood was on the show earlier in the week and he said it's a straight red card all day long. What was your view on that particular incident?
Yeah, listen, I've come in for a bit of stick on it myself, and it's funny, I find myself so conflicted in my view at times, and I find myself almost contradicting some of the things I say, because behind the scenes I work for international rugby players, and I'm in communication via them with World Rugby about trying to work out the high tackle framework. It feels slightly different in actual tackling and the ruck, whether those two things need to be refereed the same or differently. I'm obviously part of the Rugby World Cup board, so I'm close quarters to World Rugby from that perspective. But I'm a big advocate of the game and player safety. So I guess what I called at the time, my initial feeling on the incident was, oh, that's not good. And then when I looked at it and it's broken down, I had sympathy for Tom Wood, because I've been in that situation, and because the target is so tiny, and we're potentially coming into new realms or a new part of the game where we're going to look at a picture at a ruck and realize there's no positive place for you to hit it. So you're just going to have to leave it alone and let a player steal the ball. The reality is, if you look back on it and by the letter of the law, shoulder contact to a jaw with force, is there mitigation? Probably not. It is a red card. But yet, I can't help but have sympathy for him, because if there's no target, he goes into a video session on a Monday and said, well, I had no target. I didn't want to get sent off. That doesn't sit well with any professional either. And it's, there's been outrage, on social media and stuff about how this is the most clear-cut red card of all time. It's interesting talking to different factions of, within the game. I talked to a number of ex-players, and so many could understand the sympathy part. And Josh, wasn't protecting himself. Some people were like, does he have a duty of care to protect himself in that situation as well? I think ultimately, because of where we're at in the game now, on reflection, it is a red card, because we need to outlaw shoulders to the head, directly to the head. However, I do think it creates another issue within the game where we're going to have passive rucks. Maybe similarly to players having to pull out of tackles because they're worried about high shots, we're going to have players pulling out of rucks and just having to let the jackler steal the ball, because there's no active point for them to make a collision that's going to be legal, that's going to give them an opportunity of winning the ball back. And maybe that's where the game is going. But it just feels as though there's potential that it's going to sanitize the game slightly. But if that's for the for the safety of the game, maybe that's where we have to go. But it's a red card by the letter of the law. It is, because it's shoulder to the head. But it felt maybe a few years ago that it was a rugby collision that, is tough to see someone getting a red card for. Because you look at red card in the New Zealand Argentina game a few weeks back, where the sub prop came in and cleared a ruck where a player was lying prone and he hit him straight in the head. He was motionless. That's, for me, foul play, red card. Tom Wood doesn't lose his feet, gets a good position, gets his body height a fraction off his target. Unfortunately, makes collision. It just, for me, those two don't quite add up and quantify to the same penalty. But I guess we'll find out more with World Rugby. There's so many conversations going on behind the scenes that it feels that we're in a really precarious place at the minute.
Brian, you mentioned about Connacht at the weekend, and they lost out to their old head coach Pat Lam and the Bristol Bears in Galway. 27-18 it finishes now. Paul Boyle, young captain for Connacht, puts his hands up afterwards. He said he made a terrible mistake. They were in kickable range where potentially they could have got that game back to 6 points. Would have boosted their chances of playing European rugby in the new year, because they would have been well placed to qualify for the Challenge Cup. Leaving that point behind might prove to be pretty costly for them. But I presume this is a very important learning moment for Boyle as captain.
Yeah, it is, and I wouldn't, castigate him for it. Sometimes you get lost in the moment when emotions are high and you're new to the job as well. And it's funny, when I was looking at it, I was like, what are they talking about? I wasn't even thinking that way. You sometimes get in the mentality you want to finish the game as strong as you can by scoring and building the momentum for the next game, of finishing on a high rather than finishing on a low. And he tried to get a 5-pointer out of it, even though 3 would have gotten that bonus point. They weren't winning the game, but with getting an additional kick, it would have given them something from the game. But you learn from these experiences. He's relatively inexperienced. But yeah, he's held. All you can ask for is someone to appreciate that they got it wrong. And we all make errors, and potentially, I think I could have gotten it wrong at the weekend. I hold my hands up and go, yes, by the letter of the law, that's a red card. Doesn't mean you can't have sympathy or can't have a grievance of some sort, but I think he's held his hands up and gone, listen, that's a bad call from me. I'm sorry about that. You can be sure that he'll fight even harder in the next game. So you live and learn, provided you don't make that mistake a second time. You win or you learn. Yeah.
Brian, can I just ask you one from left field a little bit? So, and I know as a Dub, you mightn't have much sympathy for Mayo or their footballers after the weekend, but when you look at that Mayo team, and the near misses they've had, and to be fair, now during your Leinster career, you'd have to dig fairly deep to find a period of lack of dominance, I guess. But that kind of era from 04 to 07 or so, when there were Celtic League near misses and European Cup exits at the quarterfinal and semi-final stage, how difficult is it for a team like Mayo, to keep going back to the well again, from a psychological point of view, to finding that motivation to keep going?
No doubt, it's very difficult. And yeah, we might have had that period. I'd even extend it back probably. We won the Celtic League as it was in 2001 against Munster, which almost was acted as a negative, because we didn't understand the hard work and graft that was necessitated to continually win trophies year on year or compete year on year. So I think that worked against us. We started losing semi-finals in 2003 through to 2007. All right, but to look at the extended period that that Mayo have struggled, it must be soul destroying at times, going back into pre-season, knowing that you've been so close. But the unfortunate aspect is that teams are cyclical, and where a team has shown brilliant form for 3-4 seasons, then have a drop off, or the players retire. that hasn't been the case with Dublin. Whereas year on year, they see the squad grow. And I think that's the deflation that comes with the reality that it's going to be as hard the next year, or if not harder. And getting yourself up for finals is not a difficult thing to do, but the subconscious does eat away at you in some way, where it's like, is this ever going to be? Are we ever going to break the seal on this one? And even as a Dub fan, I've got huge sympathy for them, because they're worthy of an All-Ireland medal. It's the least that this group of players deserve. But they've just come up in a moment in time against a phenomenal outfit that are relentless in what they do. And any hole seems to be plugged by an even better player. So it's difficult to go back to this drawing board. And the only upside is that they don't have to languish for a full winter this time round, that the championship will come around a little bit quicker, a bit like McIlroy and the Masters. So with a bit of luck, we'll see a continuation of, underage players having the enthusiasm to try and break this bloody curse.
Well, as you say, they're back training on the 15th of January. It's going to come around very quickly. Brian, thanks a million for joining us on OTB AM, and hopefully it's a very Merry Christmas in the O'Driscoll household.
Thanks a lot. Cheers, guys.